Welcome, everyone, to how to automate email processing. We're going to give it about 30 seconds and then we're going to dive right in. If anyone has questions during the webinar, then I'll try and keep an eye on the chat and be happy to answer them as I go. Just a reminder that the chat is about 45 seconds to a minute behind. So go and give it a second and I'll answer your question. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. The topic today is how to turn a shared inbox into an agentic tool, or how to start processing information just from an organization perspective from your email. And this is important because there are lots of entryways into agentic AI. How do you get an agent access to the content that you want to process in a very easy and streamlined way? And a good way to do this is to set up basically read access to different inboxes within your organization. And this gives you a few benefits. The first benefit is that you're able to standardize access across your organization. And probably a bigger benefit is that you're able to have visibility and consistency within those processes. So, say you have a process and you want contracts to be reviewed the same way every time. Maybe you want them to be reviewed according to a blueprint. We covered that last week. Well, you can set up a shared inbox, attach it to an agent, and give your entire organization access to that agent so that when somebody needs a document reviewed in a way that you've already approved, you can do that. Okay. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And we're going to show you basically the steps necessary to make that happen. Let's see here. So there are a few pieces here, and we're going to go over each one individually. The first one is a shared inbox. Now, I'm not going to actually go over how to set up a shared inbox within Microsoft 365. You can find a lot of guides online. In fact, I've actually found that the best guide for you to set this up yourself is actually to go to Gemini and ask it to walk you through. And for some strange reason, Gemini has incredible information and knowledge about all things cowork and Copilot. So if you want specific steps on how to do it, including the permissions that you need within your organization, the different ways of going about doing it, go to Gemini, ask it to teach you how to set up a shared inbox, and it'll be able to do that for you. But you'll need a shared inbox. Then you need to define the types of emails that you are going to handle. And there are a few different ways you could do this. One, you can handle any email that comes into the shared inbox. That's the most blanket way to do that. Two, you can actually set up rules associated with those emails. Maybe they have to have a certain subject line. Maybe they have to have a certain body content. Maybe they need an attachment or not need an attachment. And I'll show you a couple of ways to um, see this when you're setting up your agent. And then you need to understand the analysis that is being done as a whole. And that's kind of the agentic side of things. And we'll go over that as well. All right, so here's what we'll do. We'll talk about the shared inboxes. Like I said, we're not gonna set up a shared inbox, but I will show you once you set up a shared inbox, how you connect that to an agent. We're gonna talk about the content types. We're gonna talk about the instructions that the agent follows, and then we'll define the response. And I'll show you an example of this that I've already put in place. All right, so let's switch and go back to Copilot Studio. All right. Now, within Copilot Studio, a important concept is to remember that you actually need to be working within flows, not within agents. Think about agents as just the ability to define a chatbot with custom instructions. That's it. That's what an agent is within Copilot Studio. But what we need is to set up a new agent flow. And an agent flow is something that is powered behind the scenes by Microsoft Power Automate. It's extremely powerful. There are some nuances to it. and you need to create a new flow. I've already done that here, and we're going to walk through the different pieces of it. Okay. So within Copilot Studio, when you're looking at a flow, you really live in the designer. And the designer is where you see kind of that workflow. And you can actually hook this up to agents if you would like. But the good news is that when we view the flow that's been set up here, it's very intuitive. Maybe not to set it up originally, but once you see it, it's extremely intuitive. So my flow has a trigger. That trigger is when a new email arrives in a shared mailbox. And you'll see a lot of baked in triggers. You'll see triggers for your own inbox. You'll see triggers for files being dropped in a OneDrive. You'll see them for a Excel file being updated. So it can start to get the kind of your mind running and racing about the different possibilities for what your trigger can be. And so we've selected a new email arrives in a shared inbox. And you can see within here that we actually have several things that we can set. I've set up a shared inbox that's called contract review at genserveai@microsoft.com. That was the shared inbox that I created, and that's the one that I want to be able to hook this up to. I have permission to do that as an administrator in our account. And so that's actually all that was necessary, is to say, I can set this up. Now, when you're setting up the shared inbox itself, you have to assign permissions there as well. For instance, that inbox needs permission to be able to run flows within Copilot Studio. But once again, if you go to Gemini and you talk through the requirements, even saying something as simple as I want to be able to set up a flow in Copilot Studio, it will walk you through exactly what those permissions need to be. Um, so within here, you can actually filter by including additional things. And there's some nuances here that are important. One, I'm not filtering the messages based on importance. Anything coming into the shared inbox is important, and I'll process. Two, I am only processing emails that come in with attachments. So if I just send an email to the shared inbox, it won't trigger this flow. And that's important because I'm specifically processing documents that I get from here. And then this is actually a kind of a gotcha in here that you need to be aware of. You do actually need to include the attachment. If I set this to no, then I would actually trigger this flow, but the flow itself wouldn't have access to the attachment. So that's an important kind of gotcha there. Um, the rest of what's happening here is really just to make it work. So I have to initialize a variable that is a string. And that string just basically means, hey, I'm going to go ahead and initialize my response so that I can run a prompt that writes to it. And the reason for this is because when in Power Automate and within Flow, because they're powered by the same thing, you say that you want to process attachments. Well, you could have one attachment, you could have multiple attachments. And so it processes it as a list of documents, and so it will automatically say, oh, I want to run a prompt for each attachment. And it knows that it needs to kind of set up this group for you. Well, this is obviously the bread and butter of the processing, is the prompt itself. And what's important here is that you have to basically loop over the content that you get from the attachment itself. And there are some nuances that are important because by default, if I just send in a document, well, even though if you go to Claude.ai, ChatGPT, even Gemini, you can drag and drop any number of documents into that model and it will read it for you. Well, the reason it can do that is because behind the scenes, the teams at OpenAI, Anthropic, Google have put a lot of work into making that a very user friendly experience. But what that means behind the scenes is it's actually looking at your document. It's saying, oh, this is a docx. I need to extract the content from that docx so the user can read it. Well, within Power Automate, within Flow, you don't have the access to all the different kind of niceties that those teams have built in. So if you want to be able to read certain types of documents, you have to make sure that the tools you're using accept it. So in this case, just so happens that PDFs are accepted kind of out of the box. And so that makes it a little bit easier. Well, if you want to go to the specific prompt that's being used, there are a couple different ways that you can do that. You can actually manage your prompts within um, Copilot Studio and have a list of prompts that are, tested and verified and saved. And so I can just select it here, or I can do a new custom prompt. But if I go into this prompt as a whole, hopefully Copilot Studio will let it. Yep. Um, then I see the super basic instructions that I gave it, and I made it intentionally broad just for purposes of kind of an example here. But I asked it, review the following document and tell me the following. What is it? What's its purpose? And a two-sentence summary. And that's because I didn't want it to get verbose. And then I basically said, what do I need to be aware of? Now, this is important, formatting your response in basic HTML. The reason this is important is because by default, LLMs are going to give you back just text. And occasionally, depending on your prompt, if you don't tell it the specific format you want something in, it will likely default to Markdown language. Well, Markdown is very powerful, it's very basic, but it won't render in an email. And so, since it won't render in an email, you need to have something that is natively supported by an email. Well, basic HTML is. If I put basic HTML in an email, then my email client will render that nicely for me. So if I want to have a list or even something as simple as bold and italics and headers, then I need to have it formatted in HTML. So something as simple as this sentence will make that possible for your agent. And so you just say format it in basic HTML, you're good to go. Then you have to give it the document content. And this is treated as an input. So this is also why it's important to know which types of documents you want to be able to support. Once again, by default, it will read a PDF, but there's a caveat there where if it's a scanned PDF, it won't be able to read it because that's just an image. Now, let me be clear. There are ways to process every document type. There are ways to process scanned PDFs, docx's, Excel files, PowerPoint, you name it, it can be done. But it has to be set up within Flow so that you pull in the right tools to know if it's this type of document, how am I going to extract the content? And so that's just something to be aware of as you set this up. PDFs that are text-based are handled out of the box, so we went ahead and used that. I'm going to close this and go back to the page. And a quick note, you notice that within the prompt, I referenced document. That was the input. That's why when I set it up, I have to tell this specific tool step that what I'm referencing is the content itself. And Microsoft does a pretty good job of giving you kind of helpers to know what I'm referring to here. So in this case, it's content bytes. That's the attachment from the email. And you get a finite list of variables that you can look at here. And so it looks like it's kind of black magic. It's not. And once again, just to echo, I know this is a Copilot webinar here, but Gemini actually does a fantastic job of walking you through how to set these things up. So I would recommend that if you have any questions, you go there. You can even screenshot things from the UI, put it in Gemini, and just ask it, walk me through how I can do these things, and it will do it. And it'll do it in a very easy way. So the output that I get from this, I append to a string variable. That's the variable up here that I initialized. And the reason for this is because if this was a single thing and I didn't have it in a little loop here, if I didn't have it in a little group, then I'd just be able to write to the email and be done. But because I have potentially multiple attachments, I have to do a little bit extra there. But the result is that I need to send an email from a shared mailbox. And once again, there are lots of ways that this could be done, but here I'm saying that I'm going to send it from my shared inbox. I'm going to send it to the person who sent me the email, right? So when I get an email, if I look at from, it's whoever sent the original email, and that's who I'm sending it back to. and I'm going to send it back with just a subject of contract review, and then I'm going to put in the variable that I have here, which is just the combined analysis. So very straightforward, very simple. I publish this, and all of a sudden it is live tracking my inbox. Okay. So we're going to go over to that inbox, and I'm going to show you an example of something that I sent in. So in my sent items, I have a few different sent items here, all just testing out the shared inbox. And one of the things that you'll see is I sent in an NDA. It's a very simple one that I had reviewed from a few weeks ago. And honestly, the content itself, for instance, what I put in the email um, as a subject line or as the body of the email doesn't actually matter, because if you notice within our flow within here, we don't reference any of the information in the body of the email. It's not to say we couldn't, we absolutely could. And we could put that in our prompt and we could say, here's a note from the user. What do you want to do? This is actually a little safer because there's less of a chance for prompt injections, things like that. But just quick note that for this particular example, doesn't actually matter what we put in here. So I sent this in, that's all I did. And what I get back is a nicely formatted email. And the reason that it's a nicely formatted email is because it's done in HTML. And when I look at this, this is all formatted nicely because it is HTML. So it's telling me it's an NDA, tells me the purpose, tells me the summary, just a couple sentences, and it gives me some areas of note, which is exactly what I asked it to do within my prompt. So all of a sudden, I can set this up and publish it and make it available to my entire organization. And if I wanted with my co-founder Mark, I could just say, "Hey, Mark, we're going to set up a shared inbox, and anytime somebody sends us an agreement, I want us to send it to this shared inbox so that it can analyze." Um, all the nuances. It can analyze it to know whether or not there's any dangerous clauses for us as GenServe. It can analyze it on whether or not we should send it to actual legal counsel. And we can keep all of that up to date just by updating our document review or contract review prompts. And we could also add to it over time. So all of a sudden, it gives you a very powerful tool to set something up at an organization level. And when you set something up at an organization level, then it is accessible to the entire organization without being difficult to access, right? Um, so I have one or two additional notes to go over, but once again, because we're about a minute behind on the stream, what I'm saying versus what you guys are actually seeing, feel free to put anything in the comments of the stream, and I'd be happy to answer those now. But once again, it'll take me about a minute to see it. So let's, while anybody is thinking of questions to ask, let's contrast different access points. And this is an important concept for um, an organization looking to really standardize the access to their agents. Well, within my Outlook, I have access to Copilot, right? So if I want, I could come to Copilot and I could either define a tool or I could define a specific agent that does contract review. And if I make that agent accessible to my organization, well, then I'd be able to come in here, drag and drop the email or the content that I get, and I'd say, hey, review this. And then I could have a session where I go back and forth interactively reviewing it. Well, as an organization, if I don't set up triggers and hooks or monitor that agent, then I probably wouldn't have visibility on whether or not I'm having contracts reviewed or service agreements or scopes of work, or you could come up with 1,000 different examples. But that is a legitimate way to share and publish consistent processing across your organization. Um, For the shared inbox, if I set up that so that everybody who needs something reviewed can send it to a shared inbox, well, then all of a sudden I have a built-in audit trail because at any point in time, I could log into this shared inbox and I could see who sent in the email and the content itself. In addition to that, I can come to this particular flow and I can view all of the additional runs. So I can look exactly at why this ran on February 25th and succeeded. This one ran on the 10th, about 30 minutes ago. This one failed. This one failed because the file was too large and not supported. This one succeeded because it was the right type of document. I can look at that and I can see the run details and I can know exactly what happened, why, and when. So it's kind of a built-in audit trail for me. And all of a sudden, that could be very appealing to a lot of different companies who are looking to initiate their agents in certain ways and share them across the organization. So if you're looking to share an agent across the organization, you do have a lot of possibilities. You could publish an agent. We went over this just a couple weeks ago when we talked about kind of the blueprint writer. You could create a flow, and if you do create a flow, you have a lot of different triggers that you can add. We went over one trigger today, which is the ability to run it when a new shared inbox arrives, but there are many others. You could add a trigger for, once again, I think I mentioned a file being dropped in OneDrive, a OneDrive folder. And anybody who wants to have it reviewed can just drop it in a folder and it can be reviewed the same way. And you can mix and match these things too, right? So I could have a flow that runs when somebody drops a file in a OneDrive folder. And then at the end, we could send an email to maybe my legal counsel so that anytime a file is sent, then maybe I CC my legal counsel here so they have eyes on the organization's contracts that are being reviewed. So there are a lot of possibilities for giving your organization more visibility on the capabilities of agents. And just keep that in mind because the design of the access point directly impacts whether or not you're going to have visibility on it. So, what did we do today? We showed how you can set up a shared inbox where I can send information into that shared inbox. I can connect it to an agent that is going to run a prompt or a set of prompts. And then I'm going to get a response back. And that kind of completes the entire flow where I have a kind of autonomous feedback loop where people within my organization can get feedback in a really consistent way. So, I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have other topics that you would like to cover. And I appreciate you guys joining today. Have a happy Tuesday.